Hello, I am Attorney Beriña Imperial of Know Your Rights Philippines. Today, as part of Sanggawad's Vow Free Community Starts With Me campaign, I am going to talk about Republic Act number 9262, otherwise known as the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act. According to UN Women, since the outbreak of COVID-19, emerging data and reports from those on the front lines have shown that all types of violence against women and girls, particularly domestic violence, has intensified. They call this the shadow pandemic. There is growing evidence that domestic violence acts as an opportunistic infection that thrives in the pandemic situations. The scarcity of social activities and financial pressures are increasing rifts within families. Some men who are frustrated about losing their jobs because of the pandemic may express their frustration by abusing their wives. Studies also show that lockdowns imposed to deal with COVID-19 has granted greater freedom to abusers. It has become easier for the abusers to enforce control tactics by limiting the access of the victims to phones, internet, and other people. Victims of abuse may even be scared to visit a hospital for treatment of their injuries due to the fear of contracting the COVID-19 disease. So it is truly a pandemic within a pandemic. And while most of the government's efforts are focused on addressing the effects of COVID-19, more needs to be done to address violence against women in COVID-19 response and recovery efforts. Understandably, there is a need to strengthen support for victims of gender-based violence. One way of doing this is by utilizing online resources to provide psychological support and legal aid services. So, for purposes of this discussion, we are going to thresh out pertinent provisions of the VAUSI Act in light of our current milieu. Violence against women in the time of pandemic. We are going to find out who were protected by the VAUSI Act, what particular acts are considered as violence under the VAUSI Act, and what to do and who to call in cases of violence against women. So, who were protected by the VAUSI Act? First, of course, are women, and second, these women's children. Who in particular are these women sought to be protected by the VAUSI Act? First, a wife, a former wife, a woman with whom an offender has a sexual or intimate relationship with, and a woman with whom an offender has a common child with. So, contrary to popular belief, it's not only married women who are protected by the VAUSI Act. The protection extends even to women in dating relationships and even after these relationships have ended. The VAUSI Act also seeks to protect the children of these women that I have mentioned a while ago. For purposes of the VAUSI Act, children are defined as those below 18 years of age, regardless of whether they are legitimate, illegitimate, living with their parents or not. Now, since the protection of the VAUSI Act extends to these women and children and their children, can violence contemplated by the VAUSI Act be committed only by men? Well, the answer is no. Violence can also be committed by a woman who is in an intimate or sexual relationship with another woman. In other words, these intimate relationships contemplated by the VAUSI Act also encompasses lesbian relationships. Moreover, any other person can also be considered to have committed violence against women and their children if they have conspired with the main offender or if the offender have committed violence through them or with their help. We'll now go to the forms of violence contemplated by the VAUSI Act. It is important to understand that when we speak about violence, it does not mean physical violence alone. It is one person controlling another and can involve sexual, emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. When under quarantine, women are in close proximity to their partners with limited to no freedom to go out, thus leading to an increase in physical and sexual violence at home. Such an outcome could be because of male backlash resulting from the feelings of emasculation and inadequacy at not being able to serve the role of a breadwinner of the family. It could also be because of the distorted power dynamics at home, resulting in abuse and violence that escapes the scrutiny of anyone from outside. Now, physical violence includes all kinds of bodily or physical harm, like punching, scratching, biting, pushing or shoving, slapping, kicking, choking or strangling, throwing things, force feeding or denying you food, using weapons or objects to hurt you, physically restraining you like pinning you against a wall or a floor or a bed, reckless driving, and other acts that hurt you. Now, on the other hand, sexual violence includes, but of course is not limited to, rape. Yes, rape can also happen between married couples, sexual harassment, acts of lasciviousness, treating a woman or her child as a sex object, making demeaning and sexually suggestive remarks, physically attacking the sexual parts of the victim's body, forcing a woman to watch obscene publications and indecent shows, or forcing the woman or her child to do indecent acts or make films thereof. And it could also include forcing the wife and the mistress or lover to live in the conjugal home or sleep together in the same room. It could also include causing or attempting to cause the victim to engage in any sexual activity by force. And finally, it can include prostituting the woman or her child. Now, next is psychological violence. This form of violence includes acts causing or likely to cause mental or emotional suffering of the victim, such as but not limited to intimidation, harassment, stalking, damage to property, public ridicule or humiliation, repeated verbal abuse, and probably the most common form of psychological abuse, marital infidelity. Just recently, the Supreme Court has affirmed that marital infidelity is a form of psychological violence punishable by imprisonment because it causes emotional or mental suffering on the part of the wife whose husband is having an affair or is already living with another woman. Now, it is worthy to note that the law does not actually require proof that the victim became psychologically ill due to the psychological violence done by her abuser. Rather, the law only requires emotional anguish and mental suffering to be proven. Another common example of psychological violence among women in dating relationships is when an overly jealous boyfriend or partner threatens or harasses his girlfriend or partner to cause harm to himself if the woman refuses to submit to his demands. For some women, this could appear as a mere act of pure jealousy, not knowing that they are already being controlled emotionally and are thus suffering from psychological abuse. Psychological violence or abuse also includes causing or allowing the victim to witness the physical, sexual, or psychological abuse of a member of the family to which the victim belongs. It also includes forcing or allowing the victim to witness pornography in any form or to witness abusive injury to pets, yes, pets, or to unlawful or unwanted deprivation of the woman's right to custody of her children or visitation of her children. And finally, The VAUSI Act also considers economic abuse as a form of violence. Economic abuse includes acts that make or attempt to make a woman financially dependent. Now, during this pandemic, as more women are now in informal jobs or got laid off, this led to them experiencing a greater impact as they became more economically dependent on their male counterparts. This increased economic dependence not only increases their risk of gender-based violence, but also makes it difficult to leave their perpetrators. Now, this form of abuse, economic abuse, can also be seen in the withdrawal of financial support or preventing the victim from engaging in any legitimate profession, occupation, business, or activity. This form of economic abuse is common among relationships where the men are still probably of the belief that a woman's place is in the home. Now, this provision in the VAUSI Act finds great relevance as it seeks to tell us that no woman should ever be made to choose by their partners between having a career and raising a family. This provision, however, also admits of exceptions. If the spouse or partner objects on valid, serious, and moral grounds, then the same cannot be considered as economic abuse. Economic abuse can also be seen in the deprivation or threat of deprivation of financial resources and the right to use and enjoy the conjugal, community, or property owned in common by the woman and her spouse or her partner. Can also include destroying household property and controlling the victim's own money or properties, or solely controlling the conjugal money or properties. So, now that we know the forms of violence contemplated by the VAUSI Act, how then can we now prevent these abuses? A protection order may be issued for the purpose of preventing further acts of violence against a woman or her child. A protection order aims to safeguard the victim from further harm, minimizing any disruption in the victim's daily life, and facilitating the opportunity and ability of the victim to independently regain control over her life. The provisions of the protection order shall be enforced by law enforcement agencies. But who may file a petition for the issuance of said protection order? A petition for protection order may be filed by any of the following. First, the offended party or the women and her children who have experienced violence. Second, the parents or guardians of the abused women and her children. Ascendants, descendants, or collateral relatives within the fourth civil degree of consanguinity or affinity. So, this includes your grandparents, relatives, cousins within the fourth civil degree, and even your in-laws within the fourth civil degree. Officers or social workers of the DSWD or social workers of local government units. Police officers, preferably those in charge of women and children's desks, punong barangay or barangay kagawad, a lawyer, counselor, therapist, or healthcare provider of the petitioner. And what about us, ordinary citizens? Well, we can also file for a petition for the issuance of a protection order, but there needs to be at least two concerned responsible citizens of the city or municipality where the violence against women and their children occurred and who has personal knowledge of the offense committed. So when we say personal knowledge, you have to know personally that this particular woman or her children or and their children are suffering from a particular form of abuse from the offender. One way to deal with the issue of violence against women is by constantly asking if people feel safe at home. especially in this time of pandemic. It is often possible that the victims may communicate in subtle and indirect ways, which can be easily missed. Neighbors of families with violence can also help to reduce violence against women by initiating conversation with them. If you are or you know of women suffering from violence in their homes, don't hesitate to seek help to stop the abuse. You can seek help from your barangay captain, who can also issue a protection order, the DSWD, or you can call hotlines for violence against women. It's available online. You may also ask for police assistance and legal assistance from the public attorney's office. And you may reach Know Your Rights Philippines for your concerns regarding violence against women. Now more than ever, we should remain vigilant to violence against women and their children happening in our communities. Because after all, a vow-free community starts with each one of us. Thank you, and I hope you learned something from this video. Good evening.